trials and temptations. Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. 588 in the garden, verses 1 and 2 again. 588. I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet, the birds are singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Would you pray with me? Hymn number 87. Number 87 in your hymnal. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the Surrender All, 408. 408, 1, 3, and 4. All to Jesus I surrender, all to him I freely give. I will ever love and trust him, in his presence daily live. I surrender all, I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior, I surrender all to Jesus I surrender, make me Savior wholly thine, let me feel the Holy Spirit, truly know that thou art mine. I surrender all, I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior, I surrender all to Jesus I surrender, Lord, I give myself to thee, fill me with thy love and power, let thy blessing fall on me. I surrender all, I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior, I surrender all.
We have been looking at the life of David, and last week we saw how David faced the giant, Goliath, and how he was able to be victorious over the giant because of God working through him to bring about that victory. We saw David be courageous. He was not afraid because he remembered how God had always taken care of him. Anytime anything had happened there, he talked about the lion and the bear and how God had, he was able to go and deliver him from their ferocity, if you will, and how he was able to take care of his sheep, even with bears and lions around. And so he remembered those things. He went into this facing this giant with this courage that comes from remembering what God had done in the past, remembering whose he belonged to, and that is God. David went in the name of the Lord, he fought. And so it's just a real picture of a perfect courage, if you will, and a victory over Goliath. And we talked about the idea of giants in our lives and how we need to trust in the Lord to give us the victory. And so that was the big idea there. But as we move on in David's life here, we're going to see today that even though he remembered then, there are times when fear, loneliness, discouragement can cause us to forget. And we act in such a way as if God is not our refuge. God is not our shelter. So this morning's big idea is to trust God to be your refuge and shelter, to turn to God as your refuge and shelter. Turn to God as your refuge and shelter. So we got a lot of ground to cover, but we will cover it quickly, I promise you. And we won't be here until after the time appointed, and we can all rest assured. So settle in. I hope you don't feel like you get shortchanged here, okay? If you want to use that terminology there. So where we were last week is David had conquered the giant. Right? God had delivered Israel through the hand of David, and he went back into the presence of Saul, and he was in Saul's presence, and actually Saul had given David a role of being a commander of his armies there, or at least some of his army there. And it said here at the end that David was successful in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. I'm in 1 Samuel chapter 18, which is where we're going to be today. 1 Samuel chapter 18, we're going to pick up at verse 17. But in verse 14, it said David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. So Saul is afraid of David. He's afraid because he knows that the Spirit of God is with David, even as the Spirit of God has left Saul. He knows that David is having success there, and he is afraid of David, but he wants to get rid of David. He wants to get rid of him because David stands in the way of Saul establishing his dynasty there of a kingdom, and then Jonathan eventually becoming king, and then subsequent to Jonathan, whoever else would be king in the line of King Saul. And so Saul doesn't like David, and so it tells us here, starting in 1 Samuel chapter 18, picking up verse 17, it says, Then Saul said to David, Here is my elder daughter Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. And it says here, For Saul thought, Let not my hand be against him, since he knows the Spirit of God is with David, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. And so it's interesting that David, being so courageous as he was, he slew Goliath. And if you remember, David had been asking on the battle lines what will be done for the man who defeats this giant. And he was told that he would be given a daughter of Saul for a wife. That hadn't taken place. Saul had just enlisted him back into his service, if you will, into the palace, or wherever he stayed, and then he put David out with his armies, and now he wants to give David his elder daughter because he's going to get David into the battle there, and he's hoping the Philistines will kill him, right? They'll be the one that defeats David. And so it says, and David said to Saul, and here's David's attitude, Who am I? And who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? David thinks this is not a small matter, and he says that later on. And so he's not worthy. He doesn't think he's worthy, but nothing else there's nothing else talked about that matter. In verse 19, we roll right into it. But at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, the Mahalathite, for a wife. So we don't know where Mahalath is. We just know there's Adriel, the Mahalathite, and he's given Saul's daughter. And so as we go through and we see that Saul has another daughter, and she loves David, and David has a thing for her too, it seems like. And so Saul thought he says, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall now be my son-in-law. And so David thinks he's not worthy, but Saul convinces him through his servants and through talking to David. They say to him, it's all right, Saul really likes you. He wants you to be his son-in-law, and he's willing to take care of it. The bride price is just 100 Philistine foreskins. And so David reasons in his mind, well, maybe I don't think I'm worthy, but he thinks this is worthy, just if I can pay this bride price. And so he goes out and he actually kills 200 Philistines, and he brings that bride price to Saul. And so he's there, and he wanted David to be killed by the Philistines, is what Saul was looking for. But then when David was successful here, it says David arose and went along, verse 27, so I'm skipping down there. I'm kind of giving you parts in between. I'm not reading it word for word. I'm trying to summarize it there. David arose and went along with his men and killed 200 of the Philistines, and David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number, to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal, or Michal, or Michelle. Okay, I always called her Michal, for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. And so you see, this is where the way Saul sees himself there. He sees himself as David's enemy, or David as his enemy, and he wants to take David out any opportunity he gets. And so he'll be looking for those opportunities. It's interesting that here it is, Saul, he wants to get everybody against David, but what's happening is everybody seems to be siding with David here. The people who are closest to Saul, we're going to find out Jonathan, and we already know that Jonathan was, he and David had the same kind of warrior spirit, and he loved David for his courage and for his zeal for God. And so we're going to see that a little bit more later on, but we see even Saul's daughter here loves David, even though she's not the best kind of daughter. Maybe that's why Saul thought that she would be a snare for him. We find out later on that she's into idols, and so maybe she thought she would trip him up because of her. Maybe she was a very worshipful person, but she was worshiping idols, that maybe she would trip David up and cause his heart to be like what we see in Solomon later on, that he would become an idolater as well. And so what happens there is David escapes because Saul sends some people after him, and his daughter helps David out, and so she helps him to get away as Saul tries to kill her. So we see, as we start off in chapter 19, we see another instance here of this taking place. Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide. And so, what's going on here is that Jonathan is aware of this now, because this is Saul's plan here to get rid of David. And so he wants to kill him. He's trying to get the people around him on his side as well, so that they'll be all in on it. And they're not. And so Jonathan warns David. And so Jonathan talks to David, and he tells him to stay put, hide out here. I'm going to try to talk my father out of this. And so we jump down to verse 6, and it says, "And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. And Saul swore, 'As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death.' And so Jonathan called back David. David goes back into Saul's presence then again. But then Saul has this plan here that he wants to kill David again. Saul sent messengers to David's house down in verse 11 to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, 'If you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed.' So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it on the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair at its head and covered it with clothes. And so she had some sort of idol there readily available that she put in the bed to cover. And it was a trick to try to conceal, as David was escaping there, that when Saul sent his servants there and they came looking for him, she would delay and say, 'He's not feeling well.' They go back and talk to Saul, and they say, 'Well, he's sick and he's in his bed, so we can't do him.' And Saul says, 'Well, go and get him, take him, bring him in his bed, and I'm going to execute him.' And so when they go in there, they find out that it's not David there. There's an idol with some goat's hair on it. So David gets away. And once again, I'm kind of pointing out the fact that here it is, Saul wants to bring these people against David, and these are his people who are supposed to be loyal to him, his son and his daughter. And they're there looking out for David because they sense something good in him, and maybe because they grew up with their father, they know what kind of guy he is. So David flees, and he runs, and he goes to a place called Ramah, where Samuel is. If you remember, Samuel was the judge prophet who anointed Saul and subsequently David to be king. And so David runs to Samuel to go to Ramah. They leave from there and they go to a place called Naioth. And we don't know, like these places, we have an idea where they are. It's not like we don't know, but they're very tight. It's not like they're really far away. It's not like he left here and he went to New York or something like that. These are just a few miles away from where they are. And so as he's there, Saul finds out about that. And so he sends servants out there to try to get David. And so they run into the Samuel and the prophets there, and they're prophesying, it says here in 1 Samuel chapter 19. They go down there, and it says Saul sent messengers to take David, and when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, Samuel standing as head over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. So they're so influenced by the Spirit of God here that all they can do is just praise God and talk about how great and wonderful he is, and they can't even think to go after David. And it turns out that Saul sends guys 3 times there, and the same things happen. Same thing happens. And so Saul decides, I'm going to go out there myself, and I'm going to go and get this guy. And so he goes out there, and the way that the text reads is that the prophets actually get to Naioth, where Samuel is, and the prophets, and they begin prophesying there. The way it is with Saul is he's on the way, and he gets overcome by the Spirit of God, and he begins to prophesy all the way till when he gets there, to the point where he is can't even think about David. He can only sing the praises of God. He can only talk about the greatness of God, to the point he strips of his clothes, and he's just in basically his underwear, and he's prostrate before God and stays the night that way. And so we read that, and when he went there to Naioth and Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also, as he went, he prophesied until he came to Naioth and Ramah. And he too stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay naked all that day and all that night. Thus it is said, is Saul also among the prophets? And so we see this picture of him going after David. And so you have Jonathan, right, talking Saul out of killing David. We have Michal, Saul's daughter, saving David, being willing to lie on his behalf, if you will, and then helping him to escape. Now you see the Spirit of God. We see God himself protecting David in this way, even as Saul goes for him. And David's on the run here. He knows what's happening. He's running away from Saul because he knows Saul wants to kill him. And so when he leaves Naioth, it says David, in chapter 20, verse 1, David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, he says, what have I done? What is my guilt? What is my sin before your father that he seeks my life? And so David is saying, hey, I've been loyal. And we see in these chapters that we just looked through, Saul is after David, but David is not after Saul. Saul keeps coming after him, and all David does is show his loyalty. He shows his loyalty when Saul puts him ahead of the armies. He goes and he keeps on defeating them. When it goes that Saul wants to kill David by the hand of the Philistines, David goes and fights the enemies of the Israel army, right? The enemies of God's people. And he kills 200 Philistines, right? In paying the bride price for Michal. And so David's on the run there. And as Saul even went out to where he was, David fled as Saul was overcome by the Spirit of God there. And so David fled from Naioth, and he goes back to Gibeah, which is where Jonathan is. And he goes back to Jonathan and he says, what have I done? I've just been loyal to your dad. Why does he want to kill me? So as we look at this, as we see that what's happening with David is there are some things that happen in our lives, and there are bad things that happen, and it's not because of any fault of our own. Right? He's just trying to do what he's supposed to be doing. He's being loyal. He's there. I guess maybe he didn't really have a chance to be strategic and political and whether he should fight the giant or not. He just knew he needed to stand up for God. He wasn't concerned about whether or not Saul was going to get jealous of him. He didn't even think about it that way. And so here he is. He's with Jonathan. And when he tells Jonathan this, Jonathan says, no way. What are you talking about? My father doesn't do anything without telling me about it first. So if he was going to kill you, David, I would know that. But there's just no way. You're a faithful servant of his. Now, we know that there was an instance before where Saul did want to, and he went around there, and Jonathan talked him out of it. But here it is. He's back there. He's in Jonathan's presence here. Jonathan said, no, behold, my father doesn't do nothing. He does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so. And so David says, no, what you don't understand. And one thing that's really interesting, and I didn't point it out, but if you look back in chapter 18, there's like 4 instances where it says that David acted wisely. David acted wisely. David acted wisely in his battles with the Philistines and how he operated. And so David has some wisdom. He understands Saul. And sometimes you can go around and people will tell you, no, it's not like that. No, it's not like that. I remember talking to my wife one time and I was telling her something. I said, it's not like that. She says, you don't think it's like that, but I know it is. Right? So the insight there, right? So David knows this is how it is, right? He knows how it is. And so he says, your father knows that if he tells you, because you and I are best buddies, or as they call it nowadays, BFFs, right? Best friends forever. That if you know that we're best friends, he knows that you're going to tell me. So he doesn't tell you these things. He's not telling you anymore, whatever he had told you before. And so so David says, your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. So you don't think it's this way, Jonathan, but I know that it is. Okay? And so we continue to go on down here, and we see that they work out a plan there so that they'll know, and it's not a violent plan. It's just a way that if David is around, if he's not around, the reaction that Saul has will be revealing as to his feelings towards David, whether he really wants to go after him and kill him or not. And so what happened there is that they go through all of this. They start to talk about the plan, but before they go into it all, this is one of the things that they agree upon there, because something that Jonathan understands. He says, if I am still alive, because he knows that David will be king someday, and if I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. So they had this plan that they had that they were going to work through. And so now the plan works through, and it turns out that Saul really is trying to kill David. Now Jonathan knows that as well. So we get verse 42. Then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. And so David is on the run now. He knows, okay, his best friend can't be around him. He can't be around his best friend, because what's going to happen is that's going to be dangerous for him to be near Saul in that way. He knows that he's on the run. His wife, I don't know how long they were married, but it's his wife still. He's not with his wife. He's on the run. He knows his boss wants to kill him. He's not going to lift his hand against the Lord's anointed. We find this out later, because David is not going to try to take matters in his own hands in that way. But he's afraid. He's lonely. He's discouraged. And so he goes on the run again. And now in this being lonely and discouraged and being afraid, we can be tempted to make decisions when those circumstances are there, and those decisions will be the type of things that will take us from seeking God. Instead of us turning towards God, we could be tempted to turn away from God. Because David right now, as we see where he is, he's doing everything right. And yet Saul still wants to kill him. He doesn't have special insight he knows he's been anointed, but he also knows that Saul's been anointed. He knows that he's had victory in the armies with the Philistines, but Saul had victories initially too. And so he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, but yet things are not, quote unquote, turning out the way that he wanted. So I put this up to you, that this first point here, as we're talking about trusting God to be our refuge and shelter, we may be tempted to turn away from God when we should run to him. Okay? We may be tempted to turn away from God when we should run to him. Meaning the idea is that we might take matters into our own hands. We say, well, I know this is what God tells me I'm supposed to do, and his word is very clear about some of the things I'm supposed to be doing here, or some of the things I'm not supposed to be doing, but I'm afraid, and I think I just need to do it this way. And so here we have David here. It says David, he runs away. David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech came to meet David trembling and said to him, why are you alone and no one with you? So David shows up there to this place, this town, this called Nob, this village called Nob, and it's where all the priests are. And there seems to be a worship center there. We don't know where the temple of God is right now, or the tabernacle of God. We don't know where that is. It moves around within because there's no established temple. We know that when Eli was there, it was in Shiloh, and it's moved around somewhere else. It appears that it's here in Nob. And so David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came to meet David trembling, said to him, why are you alone and no one with you? You're a general in Saul's army. Why are you here now and there's nobody with you? You're not the type of guy who travels by himself. And so he's not sure what's happening. And this causes him to be afraid. It says he trembles here. And David says this. He gives him a lie, and he tells this story, and he says, well, Saul sent me on a mission. I got this special mission to run, and I had to leave so fast that I didn't bring any food with me. I didn't bring any men with me. I didn't bring any weapons with me. I'm just here on the run here, or taking care of this urgent matter, he calls it. And Ahimelech knows that something's not right, but he doesn't know exactly. And he does know that David is a loyal servant to Saul. Everybody likes David. Remember, his popularity has grown. He goes in and out among the people, and it's a good thing. And they're so happy that he's leading them in battle and beating up on the Philistines and giving them some respect, I guess would be the word. And so here it is. He's with this priest here. And so he asks him. And so as he comes there, he talks with him a little bit. And so David says, I don't have any food. Do you have any food? Can you give me some bread? He says he knows that there's some bread there because the priests were supposed to offer bread to God each day. And so the bread would be there, be fresh baked, and then when it's done, it's day old, and they put it to the side, and then they're allowed to eat it because it's consecrated bread, and they're supposed to be holy. But there wasn't anything that said that David couldn't ever eat it as long as he ate it in the right manner. And so Ahimelech says to him, yeah, I got some bread. I got some bread here, the show bread, they used to call it there, the bread that's offered to God. It's the day-old stuff here, but I'll give you some 5 loaves there. Take it with you. And as David tells Ahimelech that he actually has some guys, and they're going to meet him in a certain place, and he's going to bring this to them. And so as he's there, it tells us there, as David is getting ready to leave, he says, as the priest has given him the bread, there was a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdsmen. So while David is there and he's talking with Ahimelech, there's one of Saul's servants there. He's a herdsman. He's an Edomite, so he probably was somebody who was conquered in one of the battles at some point in time. And so he's in Saul's service as well as a herdsman, but he's being detained there. We don't know exactly why he's there. We do know that he's detained before the Lord. So maybe he was making some kind of religious offering or something. We just don't know. And so David says to Ahimelech, don't you have a spear or a sword or anything here? Because I don't have anything in in the haste of the king's business there, I had to just run and I had to get out. And so Ahimelech, what does he do to David? He offers him the one sword that's there. And he tells him this. He says, I do have a sword. It's the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah. Behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it, for there is none but that here. And David said, there is none like that. Give it to me. So what we see here is we see God beginning to kind of cut into David's thing as to what's happening here. Because Ahimelech is reminding David of his big victory that he had over Goliath. And what did David bring into that battle? Nothing. Well, I mean, he got some rocks and a slingshot, and his staff, but he didn't have the weapons there. And it was a reminder that he, even as he battled, he said, I come in the name of the Lord, which he could have had, done at that point in time too. And so he's being reminded there of what God has done for him. And so he's got the Goliath's sword. He really doesn't need that, but he thinks he does. And so he takes it. It's offered to him. We saw that when David killed Goliath, it said he took his sword and he put it into his tent. And so at some point in time, David could have brought that before the Lord and offered it to him as a gift to God, to know that it was God who had delivered him. So now he's got this sword back there from Ahimelech. And what does he do now? It says David, he realizes that Doeg is there, and Doeg is friendly with Saul. He's one of his servants, takes care of his herds. And so David realizes, I need to be on the run. And we find out a little bit later on that David recognized Doeg. He knew that he was probably going to say something. As a matter of fact, David could have killed him right then and there. But he didn't. He was too concerned about himself there, and he wasn't going to go and go at this Doeg this way. But because of what he does here, there begins to be some consequences that affect some other people. But let me go on here first. After he leaves there, it says, David rose, verse 10, and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, is not this David the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. David is panicking, right? He takes the sword of Goliath and he goes down to Goliath's hometown, Gath, right? Where there's the king there. And I don't know what David is thinking. Maybe he just knows he needs to get away from Saul, and I'm going to go to where Saul's enemies are and he won't chase me there. But he goes down there, and as he goes down there, Achish's soldiers recognize David. This is David. As a matter of fact, they call him the king of Israel, right? And so they think he's the king of the land. But he's really not. But they're afraid of David. They know him, and they say, no way. Yeah. So what they do is they said, is this not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing these songs about him? So what are you doing here? Why are you bringing this guy in to get close to you? And so when David heard that, it says he changed his behavior before them. And what did he do? He pretended to be insane in their hands. And what did he do? He makes marks on the doors of the gate. He lets spit run down on his beard. He acts like a crazy man. Crazy. I mean, it's interesting, right? This is somebody who supposedly trusts God but right now he's panicking. Okay? And he's known victory in God before, right? He's known the deliverance from the bear, from the lion, from Goliath, in all of these battles before. And here it is. He does something crazy. He goes down to the enemy. When they see him, they think, well, we got to take this guy out. And so he acts like a crazy man. And so the king says, aren't there enough crazy people already around me? Why are you going to bring this guy and bring him close to me? Get rid of him. And so David gets delivered, if you will, in that. Okay? And so he makes this decision there. He goes to Nob, then he goes down to Achish, and he not really thinking. Right now, he's only thinking about himself. You know, he was anointed to be the king of Israel. But maybe that's not present in his mind right now. I don't think it is. And so sometimes we find ourselves, and we got to understand that the decisions that we make, all of our decisions, right? But especially when we think about when we are lonely, when we are discouraged, when we are afraid, those decisions affect others as well as ourselves. And if we look into chapter 22, we're going to see how they affect other people. So this is what happens here. As David, he's making these decisions, he's panicking there, but in the process of all of this, right? Why has God allowed this to happen? David is going to be king. He's been anointed king. Saul is currently king. David is winning battles. David has won a huge battle with Goliath and subsequent battles there. Because God wants him to trust him and him only. God is preparing David to be the king. This is all part of God's plan in all of this. We don't see that. We don't recognize it. We don't understand it, because when we find ourselves in those situations, we're like, what's going on, God? I did what you wanted me to do. I'm acting. I've been living the way you want me to live. But yet here I find these things happening to me. And so David panics. And so we want to be mindful of the decisions we make, especially those that when we're lonely, when we're discouraged, when we're afraid. Because we don't think so much about it. All we're thinking about is get me out of where I am right now. And here he goes. David departed from there, chapter 22. David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam, which is down towards Gath now. He's halfway there. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became commander over them. And there were with him about 400 men. So all these people come down to where they hear David is in the cave of Adullam, and these are not the cream of the crop, right? These are the people who are debtors. These are the people who are in distress. These are the people who are bitter in soul for some reason or another. These are the misfits. And they gather around David, and they become some of David's mighty warriors. They're people who are with him as he's moving around now. And so they're trusting David as he trusts in the Lord, and they're following him where he leads. And so as he's in this cave, it says there that he eventually, all these people came down to him, and so he's concerned about everything. He knows that his father and his mother, he's concerned about them, so he wants to put them in a place of safety. And so David goes down. It says he went from there to Mizpah of Moab. And if we know and remember anything about Moab, David's great-grandmother, Ruth, was a Moabite, right? She was a Moabitess. And so he goes down there. So this would be his dad would be the grandson there. And so maybe he has some people there. Maybe that's why David went there. We don't know, but I'm thinking that's probably it. And he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and my mother stay with you till I know what God will do for me. And he left them with the king of Moab. And where does he go? And they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, do not remain in the stronghold, depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hera. So as they're there, David wants to go into this stronghold there. It's a place that's built up, a place where he can find refuge, he can find strength there. And this prophet tells him no. The prophet named Gad, who seems to be with David wherever he's going now. He says, don't remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah. Right? Don't go down back there, back there and into the land of the Philistines. Go to the land of the living. And so I put up here some slides because we know after the fact what David was thinking, because he wrote some of the Psalms while all this stuff was happening. And it's very insightful to know what was going on inside of his mind and his heart as he was doing so. So if you read Psalm 142, and I do have it up there on the screen, it says, with my voice, and it says he wrote this while he was in the cave. With my voice I cried out to the Lord. With my voice I pled for mercy to the Lord. I poured out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see there is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. So he knows this. He feels this loneliness now. But I think with everyone down there with him at the cave, you got these 400 people and then his family members. He realizes now that whatever he does is really affecting other people around him. And so he's going to try to, he's probably awakened to the fact that decisions that he made before were probably foolish decisions, because especially when he goes down there and he acts like a crazy man, he's lost all of his dignity there, especially before a Gentile Philistine king, right? The enemies of God. And so now he's thinking about things, and he's written this psalm for us there. We know that he realizes there's no one who cares about him. There's no one. He feels that loneliness, and that he's gone back to what he knows is true and right. He's putting his trust in the Lord for his shelter and his refuge. And so now we find out here, as David is moving about and he's gotten out of this stronghold. A stronghold is a place that's fortified. It's a place of shelter. It's a place of refuge. The prophet here, Gad, tells him to get out of that place. Don't go there. Don't put your trust in that. And so David knows where to put his trust. He begins to rethink things and remember where his trust should be. And so he goes, and it says here, he leaves and he goes to a place called the Forest of Hera. Now Saul heard that David was discovered and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants are standing about him. He's holding court there in this hilltop. And so what Saul says is, he says, is David giving you guys vineyards? Is he giving you land? Has he promised you anything? I'm the one who does that. Why are you all conspiring against me? Nobody tells me what's happening, because he just found out now where David was. But he says, none of you guys are telling me what's happening. You don't know where he is. You don't know what he's doing. You're not giving me any clue here when you do know these things. You're all part of a conspiracy. And what do you do when somebody gives you a tongue lashing like that? You sit there and you say nothing, because there's nothing to say. But here comes this Doeg the Edomite, right? He sees an opportunity for him to get in good standing with Saul. And so here's what he says. And he doesn't tell the whole story. He just tells his perception of what was going on there. Verse 9. It says here, then answered Doeg the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. So now what Doeg does is he says, Ahimelech, he's in on all of this. He priests helped David out. And Saul says, oh, now everybody's there on the conspiracy. It's not just a few people. It's all of these people. It's family members. It's servants. Now it's the priests. They're all in on it. And so he summons all the priests to come there. And he summons them. And it says here, as he did so, he inquired, and Ahimelech says, what are you accusing me of? David's your most loyal servant. He's always been in the king's service. I've done all of the things I did for him then that I've done for him before. Why are you saying that I'm conspiring against you? I'm not. And we aren't. But he doesn't believe it. So Saul brings the charge, and then he puts the sentence there, and then he executes the sentence. He tells him, go take care of all of these priests. Kill them all, slaughter them all. And the servants say, no. They won't do it. And you know, it's interesting because we talk about the king being the king and whatever he says go. You remember earlier in chapter 14 there, Saul had said that anyone who ate anything before this battle was up, that they would be killed, and it turned out to be Jonathan. And so he says, Jonathan must die. And then all the people said, no, you can't kill Jonathan. We're not going to let you kill Jonathan. Jonathan brought the victory here through the Lord, through Jonathan. And so now they're standing up to Saul again. They won't do it. But Doeg the Edomite ends up doing it. And he goes and slaughters all the priests. All of them. I think there's 85 of them, if I'm correct there. And not only that, goes back to the village, and then he kills all the people there too. And so he wipes out this entire community. And so there is one person who survives, and his name is Abiathar. And so he escaped, it says, verse 20. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul. I knew it. I knew it. And he says, and I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. I'm responsible for that. David recognizes that. Remember what I said? Sometimes the decisions we make, they affect other people around us. This is what David did, going there to Ahimelech, and he put all these people in danger. And he recognizes it. Now you have Abiathar there, and so David says to him, verse 23, stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping. David's hunted by Saul, right? Saul has a contract to kill David, but David remains safe. And now that Abiathar is there, he's with David, and David says, I take responsibility for that. Stay with me. I'll keep you safe. Those who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping. Why? Because David realized at that point in time, and had, through all of these decisions, had come to realize that he had trusted in himself, but now he was turning that trust back to God. Remember that Psalm 142 that we just saw there? We see that David was trusting in God. So the last point I want us to see here is that the Lord is our security. It's not in the battle armaments that David could have there. It's not in our wealth. It's not in our health. It's not in our children. It's not in anything. It's in God. So the Lord is our security. So this morning, as we're thinking about it, David had that huge victory we looked at just before all this, and then things started to change, and we see that even a man after God's own heart is still just a man. So turn to God for your refuge and your shelter. He will be your security.